The Arctic wind howled like a living thing, biting at everything it touched. Miles away from any human settlement, the endless white stretched as far as the eye could see. It was desolate, cold, and unforgiving, a place where even the bravest dared not tread for long. But Lars Jensen wasn't just anyone. Lars was an environmental researcher stationed near the edge of civilization. His job was to study the effects of climate change on polar ice caps, but he often found himself alone, surrounded by nothing but snow and silence. He had grown used to solitude over the years, finding peace in the vast emptiness. That is, until one fateful evening when his world turned upside down. It started with a faint glimmer of light in the distance. At first, Lars thought it might be the reflection of moonlight off the ice or perhaps some trick of the weather. But as he squinted through his binoculars, he realized it wasn't natural. The glow pulsed faintly, almost rhythmically, like a heartbeat. Intrigued and more than a little curious, he strapped on his snowshoes and trudged toward it, clutching his flashlight tightly. When he finally reached the source of the light, what he saw left him speechless. Half buried in the snow was a strange object unlike anything he'd ever encountered before. Its surface shimmered with iridescent colors that shifted depending on how you looked at it. It wasn't metal, nor rock. It seemed alive somehow, humming softly under the touch of his gloved hand. Before Lars could process what he was seeing, movement caught his attention nearby. Two figures stumbled out from behind the object, their forms slender and otherworldly. They were humanoid but unmistakably alien, their skin glowing faintly blue and their eyes large and luminous. Their clothes, it could even be called, that seemed made of flowing material that shimmered like liquid starlight. They collapsed into the snow, shivering violently despite their ethereal appearance. For a moment, Lars froze, unsure whether to run or help. These beings weren't supposed to exist outside science fiction novels. Yet here they were, fragile and vulnerable, right in front of him. "Help," one of them whispered weakly, her voice soft and melodic yet tinged with desperation. She reached out a trembling hand toward him. Her fingers delicate and elongated. Something inside Lars stirred, compassion, maybe, or simple human instinct. Whatever hesitation he felt melted away as he knelt beside them. He removed his heavy coat and wrapped it around the nearest figure, who stared up at him with wide, unblinking eyes filled with both fear and gratitude. "You're safe now," Lars said gently, though he doubted they understood him. "I'll get you warmed up." As he worked to shield them from the biting cold, Lars couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was bigger than him. Who were these creatures? Where had they come from? And why had fate brought them crashing into his lonely corner of the world? For all its advances, humanity had always assumed itself to be alone in the universe, or at least superior to whatever else might exist out there. Aliens, if they existed, were often imagined as conquerors or destroyers, beings far beyond human comprehension. Yet here were two alien women, freezing and helpless, relying on a mere mortal for survival. By the time Lars managed to drag them back to his small research outpost, questions swirled in his mind like the storm outside. How would the rest of the world react if they knew about this? Would governments swoop in, weapons drawn, ready to capture or kill? Or would people dismiss it as a hoax? But none of those thoughts mattered right now. All that mattered was keeping these strangers alive. As he lit a fire in the tiny cabin and watched their shivers slowly subside, Lars felt a strange sense of purpose blossoming within him. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for certain: life as he knew it would never be the same again. And then came the twist that sealed his fate. One of the sisters opened her mouth and spoke a single word in perfect English, her voice trembling but clear. "Thank you." Lars froze, staring at her in disbelief. Before he could respond, she added softly, "We need your help. Please, don't leave us." Little did Lars know, this plea would bind him to them in ways he couldn't yet imagine, and set into motion events that would change not only his life but the future of humanity itself. The fire crackled softly in the small cabin, casting flickering shadows on the wooden walls. Lars sat across from the two alien sisters, his mind racing as he tried to process everything that had happened. The warmth of the fire seemed to have revived them somewhat. Their glowing skin no longer looked pale and lifeless, and their luminous eyes now held a spark of curiosity. One of the sisters, the one who had spoken earlier, was sitting upright, her gaze fixed intently on Lars. Her name, she explained haltingly, was Leora. The other sister, quieter but equally observant, introduced herself as Nisa. Both names sounded strange yet beautiful, like music played on an unfamiliar instrument. Lars wasn't sure where to begin. "You know English?" he asked cautiously, his voice barely above a whisper. Leora nodded slowly. "Your languages are simple for us to learn," she said, her tone calm but tinged with exhaustion. "We adapted quickly after our arrival." "Arrival?" Lars echoed, leaning forward slightly. "Where did you come from? And why are you here?" Nisa shifted uncomfortably at the question, her hands clasped tightly together. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Leora sighed, her expression softening as though deciding whether to trust him. "Our home is far away," she began, choosing her words carefully. "A world unlike yours, filled with light and warmth, but it is dying. Our people sent us ahead to find shelter, to seek aid among the stars." Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the weight of her words. Lars felt a pang of sympathy. Whatever they were, these beings weren't invaders or conquerors. They were refugees, just like so many humans displaced by war or disaster back on Earth. "But why Earth?" Lars pressed gently. "There must be thousands of planets out there. Why choose this one?" Leora hesitated, glancing at Nisa before answering. "Because your species intrigued us. You are resilient, adaptable. Even when faced with hardships, you endure. We thought perhaps you might understand." Lars frowned, unsure how to respond. Humanity hadn't exactly earned a reputation for kindness or unity. Wars, pollution, greed, it was hard to imagine aliens seeing anything admirable in such chaos. Yet here they were, placing their hope in him. Before he could say anything, Nissa suddenly stood up, her movements graceful yet urgent. She pointed toward the window, her glowing eyes wide with alarm. Outside, the wind had picked up again, carrying with it faint flashes of light in the distance. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Who's coming?" Lars asked, rising to his feet. His heart pounded as he moved closer to the window, peering into the swirling snowstorm. At first, all he saw was darkness. Then, shapes began to emerge, dark silhouettes moving swiftly against the icy backdrop. "They followed us," Leora explained, her voice strained. "Our enemies. They do not want us to succeed." Lars turned back to face them, his mind reeling. This was too much to take in. Aliens seeking refuge, mysterious pursuers hunting them down. It sounded like something out of a movie. But the fear in their eyes was real, undeniable. "What do we do?" Lars asked, his voice firm despite the panic bubbling inside him. "If they find you, they will kill us," Nissa interrupted, her voice barely audible. "And anyone who helps us." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Lars stared at the two sisters, weighing his options. He could turn them away, pretend none of this had happened, and go back to his quiet life studying ice caps. Or he could stay and fight alongside them, risking everything for strangers from another world. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of retreating into despair, Lars felt a surge of determination. These beings had placed their trust in him, however reluctantly. And deep down, he knew he couldn't abandon them, not when they needed help the most. "We'll hide you," he said finally, his voice steady. "This place is remote." "No one comes here unless they know exactly where to look?" Leora looked at him, her luminous eyes searching his face. "Why would you risk yourself for us?" "Your kind has no reason to care about ours." Lars hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Maybe because I've spent enough time alone to know what it feels like to need help. Besides, isn't that what makes us human? Helping each other, even when it's hard?" His response seemed to surprise both sisters. Leora's lips curved into a small, tentative smile, while Nissa tilted her head curiously, as if trying to understand the concept. As they prepared to conceal themselves deeper within the outpost, Lars couldn't shake the feeling that this decision would change everything. Little did he know, his act of kindness would soon force him to confront not only the alien hunters closing in, but also the true nature of humanity itself. And outside, the storm raged on, hiding secrets darker and more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The storm outside grew fiercer, howling like a wild beast determined to tear through the fragile walls of Lars' cabin. Inside, the tension was just as palpable. The three of them worked quickly, moving furniture and supplies to create makeshift hiding spots in case the hunters managed to find their way here. Every creak of the wooden floorboards made Lars flinch, his ears straining for any sound that might signal danger. Leora and Nissa moved with quiet efficiency, their movements fluid and deliberate despite their weakened state. They seemed to communicate silently, exchanging glances that carried entire conversations without words. It was eerie, but also a strangely beautiful reminder of how different they were from humans, yet how much they shared the same instinct. For survival. As they worked, Lars couldn't help but ask more questions. Who are these hunters? Are they from your world too? Nissa paused, her glowing eyes meeting his. They are remnants, she said softly, choosing her words carefully. Once allies, now corrupted by fear and anger. When our planet began to die, factions formed. Some sought peace, others domination. The hunters belong to those who believe only the strong deserve to survive. And you don't agree with them, Lars guessed. Leora shook her head firmly. No, survival should not come at the cost of others. We came here seeking harmony. Not conflict, but they see us as traitors. To them, anyone who dares to seek refuge elsewhere is a threat. Her words struck a chord deep within Lars. He had seen similar patterns play out on Earth communities torn apart by greed and power, people turning against one another instead of working together. If even aliens struggled with such divisions, maybe humanity wasn't so unique after all, but there was something else bothering him. Why did you choose Earth specifically? Surely there must be safer places out there. Nissa hesitated before answering. Your world has potential. Despite its flaws, it holds life, diversity, resilience. Your species adapts, learns, grows. That is rare among the stars. Lars chuckled dryly. You're giving us too much credit. Look at what we've done to this planet: pollution, wars, destruction, hardly the picture of harmony. To his surprise, Leora smiled faintly. Perhaps. But you also create art, music, stories. You dream of better futures. That is why we hoped maybe you could teach us. Help us rebuild. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For the first time, Lars realized just how much was riding on this encounter, not just for the sisters, but for humanity itself. These aliens weren't just refugees. They were emissaries carrying the hopes of an entire dying civilization. And somehow he had become part of their story. Just then, a loud thud echoed from outside, shaking the cabin. All three froze, hearts pounding. The wind screamed louder than ever, but beneath it, Lars thought he heard footsteps crunching through. The snow, they're close, Nissa whispered, her voice trembling. She glanced toward the window, her luminous eyes wide with fear. Lars grabbed a flashlight and crept cautiously to the door. Peering through a crack in the wood, he saw shadowy figures moving in the distance. They weren't human, they were taller, their forms angular and menacing, clad in dark armor that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. One of them raised a device that emitted a low hum, scanning the area systematically. They're looking for you, Lars muttered under his breath. As he stepped back inside. We need to do something, Leora nodded grimly. We cannot let them find us. Not here, not now, an idea sparked in Lars' mind. If they're using tech to scan for heat signatures, maybe we can confuse them. I have some equipment left. Over from my research, it emits electromagnetic pulses. If we set it up right, it could disrupt their scanners long enough for them to lose interest. Nissa tilted her head curiously. You would risk yourself to protect us? It's not about risking myself, Lars replied, his voice steady. It's about doing what's right. Besides, if they catch me, maybe I can stall them while you two escape? Leora placed a hand on his arm, her touch surprisingly warm. despite her alien nature. You amaze me, Lars Jensen. Few of your kind would show such courage. Her words gave him strength, though he still felt a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. Together, they gathered the equipment and set it up near the edge of the property, programming it to emit bursts of interference at random intervals. As they worked, Lars marveled at how naturally they collaborated. Despite coming from completely different worlds, when everything was ready, Lars stood back and took a deep breath. All right, let's hope this works. Moments later, the device activated, sending waves of static energy rippling through the air. Outside, the hunters paused, their heads snapping toward the source of the disturbance. Confusion flickered across their faces, or at least, what Lars assumed were faces beneath their helmets. After a moment, they turned away, heading in the opposite direction. For a brief moment, relief washed over Lars, but it didn't last long. As he watched the hunters disappear into the storm, he realized something important. This victory was only temporary. Sooner or later, the hunters would return, and next time, they might not be so easily fooled. Back inside the cabin, Leora and Nissa exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. You've bought us time, Leora said quietly. But the real challenge lies ahead. Lars nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: humanity's ingenuity and heart would be put to the test. And perhaps, just perhaps, these alien sisters would learn firsthand what truly made humans special. As the storm raged on outside, Lars found himself wondering if he'd underestimated his own species as much as the aliens had once underestimated Earth. Maybe, just maybe, humanity had more to offer the universe than he'd ever imagined. The storm had finally begun to subside, leaving behind an eerie stillness that blanketed the Arctic wilderness. Inside the cabin, Lars sat slumped in a chair, his body heavy with exhaustion but his mind racing. The temporary victory against the hunters felt hollow now, like holding back the tide with a single hand. He knew it was only a matter of time. Before they returned, and next time, they wouldn't be fooled so easily. Leora and Nissa were huddled together on the floor, their glowing forms dimmer than usual, as though their energy was waning. They whispered softly to each other in their melodic language, occasionally glancing at Lars with expressions he couldn't quite decipher. Gratitude? Fear? Something else entirely? You've done more for us than we could have hoped, Leora said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice was gentle but carried a weight that made Lars look up sharply. I haven't done enough, he replied, shaking his head. All I did was delay the inevitable. If those hunters come back, they will, Nissa interrupted her. Tone grim, she looked at him with luminous eyes filled with both sorrow and resolve. But you've given us something far greater than time. You've shown us hope. Lars frowned, unsure what she meant. Hope? How can you find hope in all this? Nissa hesitated, then spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully. In our world, survival often comes at the cost of others. Strength is valued above all else, but here, she gestured vaguely around the room, taking in the modest cabin and its simple comforts. Here, we see kindness without condition, courage without calculation. It's strange and beautiful. Her words struck Lars deeply. He had always thought of humanity as flawed, messy, and self-destructive. Yet here were two alien beings, survivors of a dying world, marveling at qualities he had never considered remarkable. Maybe there was something extraordinary about humanity. After all, not despite its imperfections, but because of them. Before he could respond, Leora leaned forward, her gaze piercing. We need your help again, Lars. There's something we must show you. Curiosity outweighed caution as Lars nodded. What is it? Without another word, Leora reached into the folds of her shimmering garment and pulled out a small, crystalline object. It pulsed faintly with light, casting soft hues across the room. As she held it out to him, Lars noticed intricate patterns etched into its surface, patterns that seemed to shift and change as he stared at them. This is a fragment of our homeworld, Leora explained. It contains memories, knowledge, everything we left behind. But it also holds the key to saving both our people and yours. Lars took the crystal cautiously, feeling its warmth seep into his fingers. How does it work? It responds to intent, Nissa said, her voice barely above a whisper. Focus on what you want to know, and it will guide you. Skeptical but intrigued, Lars closed his eyes and concentrated. At first, nothing happened. Then, images began to flood his mind-vivid, overwhelming scenes of towering cities bathed in golden light, vast oceans teeming with life and skies streaked with colors no human eye had ever seen. But these visions were fleeting, replaced by darker ones, crumbling structures, barren landscapes, and desperate faces pleading for salvation. When he opened his eyes, he found both sisters watching him intently. "That's your world?" he asked hoarsely. "What happened to it?" "A chain reaction," Leora answered sadly. "Our technology advanced faster than our wisdom. We consumed resources recklessly, ignored warnings, and turned against each other when things fell apart." "Sound familiar?" Lars winced. The parallels to Earth were undeniable. Humanity wasn't too different from these aliens. It was walking the same dangerous path, blinded by short-sightedness and greed. But it doesn't have to end that way. Nissa added quickly, sensing his despair. "Your species still has time. With guidance, with unity, you could avoid our fate." Lars stared at the crystal in his hands, realization dawning. This wasn't just about helping the sisters escape their pursuers anymore. It was about something much bigger, a chance to learn from their mistakes and forge a new future, not just for Earth, but for any civilization willing to listen. Suddenly, a loud crash outside shattered the moment. All three jumped to their feet as the sound of splintering wood echoed through the cabin. The hunters had returned, and this time, they weren't going to leave empty-handed. "Stay here," Lars barked, instinctively grabbing a crowbar from the corner. His heart pounded as he moved toward the door, every nerve screaming at him to run. But running wouldn't solve anything. Not this time. As he stepped outside, the cold air hit him like a wall. Standing a few feet away were three hunters, their dark armor gleaming menacingly in the moonlight. One of them raised a weapon, pointing it directly at Lars. "You're harboring fugitives," one of the hunters growled, his voice distorted and mechanical. "Hand them over or suffer the consequences." For a moment, fear threatened to paralyze Lars, but then he remembered the crystal in his pocket, the symbol of hope and possibility. These hunters didn't understand what they were destroying. They saw the sisters as threats, obstacles to be eliminated. But Lars saw something else, potential allies, teachers, saviors. "No," he said firmly, raising the crowbar defensively. "I won't let you hurt them." The hunters exchanged glances, clearly surprised by his defiance. Then, almost imperceptibly, one of them smirked beneath his helmet. "Very well. You'll regret this decision." As the standoff intensified, Lars realized something crucial. The hunters weren't invincible. They were driven by fear and hatred, just like the factions that had torn the sisters' world apart. And maybe, just maybe, that was their greatest weakness. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open slightly. Lars glanced back to see Leora and Nissa standing there, their glowing forms steady and resolute. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. For the first time, the hunters hesitated. Something about the sight of the three of them, united human and alien alike, seemed to unsettle them. Perhaps they had underestimated humanity. Perhaps they hadn't anticipated the power of compassion and courage. And in that moment, Lars understood. The turning point wasn't just about surviving the hunters. It was about proving that humanity and those who chose to stand with it could rise above division and despair. The battle ahead would be fierce, but Lars felt a spark of determination ignite within him. Whatever came next, he wouldn't face it alone. The hunters advanced slowly, their armored boots crunching against the frozen ground. Each step seemed deliberate, calculated, a predator closing in on its prey. Lars tightened his grip on the crowbar, his breath visible in quick puffs of steam as the icy air bit into his lungs. He knew he was outnumbered and outmatched, but something inside him refused to back down. Behind him, Leora and Nissa stood side by side, their glowing forms casting faint light across the snow-covered landscape. They weren't armed, at least. Not in any conventional sense, but there was a quiet strength in their presence that made Lars feel less alone. Whatever happened next, they were ready to face it together, You don't have to do this. Lars called out, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his insides. We're not your enemies. One of the hunters tilted his head slightly, his helmet hiding any expression beneath. You protect traitors, he growled, his mechanical voice devoid of emotion. That makes you one of them. Lyra stepped forward cautiously, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. Please listen, she said softly, her melodic voice cutting through the tension like a knife. This isn't about sides or factions. Our world is dying, and so is yours if you continue down this path. Fighting each other won't save anyone. For a moment, the hunter hesitated, as though her words had struck a chord. But then another hunter raised his weapon, aiming directly at Leora. Enough talk, he snarled. They've already caused enough damage. Nissa moved instinctively, placing herself between her sister and the weapon. Her eyes glowed brighter, almost defiantly. If you want her, you'll have to go through me. The standoff grew heavier, the weight of impending violence pressing down on all of them. Lars glanced over his shoulder at the sisters, their courage inspiring him even as dread coiled in his stomach. These beings, so different from humans yet so similar in their capacity for bravery, were willing to risk everything for each other. How could he possibly stand aside? Why are you doing this? Lars demanded, trying to buy time. What do you gain by killing them? By destroying hope? The lead hunter turned his helmeted gaze toward Lars, his tone cold and dismissive. Hope is weakness. Survival belongs to the strong. The rest are expendable. Lars felt a surge of anger rise within him. No, he snapped, stepping forward despite the danger. Survival isn't about being the strongest, it's about working together. About finding solutions instead of creating more problems. That's what makes life worth fighting for. His words hung in the air, met with silence. For a brief moment, none of the hunters moved, as if processing what he'd said. Then, without warning, the third hunter lunged forward. Swinging a metallic staff with terrifying speed, Lars barely managed to dodge, the weapon slicing through the air where his head had been moments before. Adrenaline surged through him as he swung the crowbar wildly, catching the hunter off guard and forcing him to stumble backward. The other two hunters reacted instantly, charging toward him with weapons drawn. Lars! Nissa shouted, her voice filled with alarm, before they could reach him. A blinding flash of light erupted from the crystal still clutched in Lars' pocket. It pulsed violently, sending shockwaves rippling outward that knocked everyone, including the hunters, off their feet. Snow swirled chaotically around them as the light dimmed, leaving only an eerie glow hovering in the air. When Lars staggered to his feet, blinking away spots from his vision, he saw the hunters struggling to regain their footing. Their armor crackled with residual energy, and their movements were sluggish, disoriented. Whatever the crystal had done, it had given them a temporary advantage. We need to move, Lars yelled, turning back toward the cabin. Now! Leora and Nissa didn't hesitate. Together, they grabbed Lars' arms and pulled him toward the safety of the outpost, their combined strength carrying him faster than he could have run alone. As they disappeared inside, the hunters recovered just enough to give chase, shouting threats in their harsh, distorted voices. Once inside, Lars slammed the door shut and barricaded it with whatever furniture he could find. His hands trembled. As he worked, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. Outside, the hunters began pounding on the walls, their weapons firing blasts of energy that splintered the wood and sent shards flying. They won't stop, Nissa whispered, her voice trembling. Not until we're dead or captured. But we can't stay here either, Leora added, looking around desperately. If we don't act now, they'll tear this place apart. Lars nodded grimly. Then we fight back. With everything we've got? He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crystal, holding it up for the sisters to see. Its glow had intensified, pulsing rhythmically as though responding to the chaos around them. This thing saved us once, he said firmly. Maybe it can do it again if we use it right. Leora exchanged a glance with Nissa, then nodded. It's our best chance. But using it requires focus and trust. Trust me, Lars replied without hesitation. I'm not letting you down. As they gathered around the crystal, Lars focused all his thoughts on protection, unity, and survival. The sisters joined him, their hands hovering above the object, as it began to hum louder, vibrating with an energy that seemed alive. Colors danced across its surface, shifting and swirling like galaxies colliding. Outside, the hunters redoubled their efforts, smashing through the barricade with relentless force. Splinters flew everywhere as the door finally gave way, revealing the dark figures silhouetted against the pale moonlight. One of them raised his weapon, preparing to fire, and then the crystal exploded with light. A wave of energy surged outward, engulfing the cabin and everything around it. The hunters froze. Mid-motion, their weapons falling from limp hands as the brilliance overwhelmed them. For a moment, time itself seemed to pause, suspended in the glow of something far greater than any of them had imagined. When the light faded, the hunters were gone, or at least incapacitated, lying unconscious in the snow. Inside the cabin, Lars, Leora, and Nissa collapsed to the floor, exhausted but alive. The crystal lay silent in Lars' palm, its power spent for now. Breathing heavily, Lars looked at the sisters, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. Against all odds, they had stood together, defying those who sought to divide and destroy. And though the battle wasn't over, one thing was clear: humanity, and those who chose to stand alongside it, had shown its true strength. In that moment, Lars realized the stakes had shifted. This wasn't just about saving 2 alien refugees anymore. It was about proving to the universe that cooperation, compassion, and courage could overcome even the darkest forces. The galaxy would never be the same. The cabin was eerily silent after. The storm of energy had passed, save for the faint crackle of smoldering wood and the sound of heavy breathing. Lars sat slumped against the wall, his body aching but his mind racing. The crystal lay in his lap, its light now dimmed to a soft, steady glow. It felt warm, almost alive, as though it were resting after expending its incredible power. Leora and Nissa knelt beside him, their luminous forms flickering like candle flames in the aftermath of the surge. They looked exhausted but unbroken, their eyes locked on the small object that had just turned the tide. For a moment, none of them spoke, each lost in their own thoughts about what had just happened and what it meant. They're gone. Nissa finally whispered, her voice tinged with disbelief. At least for now. For now, Leora echoed grimly, glancing toward the shattered doorway. Outside, the hunters lay sprawled unconscious in the snow, their dark armor dulled by the crystal's pulse. But they'll wake up eventually. And when they do, they'll come back angrier than ever. Lars finished for her, his tone resolute despite the weariness etched into his face. He tightened his grip on the crystal, feeling its faint hum resonate through his fingers. We can't keep running, or hiding forever. We need to plan a way to end this once and for all. Leora studied him carefully, her glowing eyes filled with something akin to admiration. You've already done so much, Lars, more than anyone could have asked of you. But if we're going to stop them, we'll need more than brute force or clever tricks. We'll need to change their minds. Change their minds? Lars repeated skeptically. How are we supposed to do that? These hunters don't exactly seem like the negotiating type. Nissa leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. They're not wrong to fear us, or rather, what they think we represent. To them, survival means domination. Cooperation is weakness. But maybe there's still a part of them that remembers otherwise. Lars frowned, trying to make sense of her words. You mean show them that your way, the sisters' way, is better? Not just ours, Leora corrected gently. Yours too. Humanity's. You've shown us kindness, courage, selflessness, qualities they've forgotten exist. If we can remind them of those things, maybe we can break through their hatred. It was a risky idea, one that relied on faith more than logic. But Lars couldn't deny the truth in her words. The hunters might be dangerous, but they weren't monsters. They were products of their environment, shaped by fear and desperation. Maybe, just maybe, they could be reached. All right, Lars said slowly, nodding to himself. So how do we pull this off? Leora reached out and placed a hand over his, her touch surprisingly gentle. With this, she gestured to the crystal, which pulsed faintly in response. It holds memories not just of our world, but of yours as well, of hope, resilience, unity. If we channel that energy directly into their minds, they'll see what we see. They'll feel what we feel. Nissa nodded in agreement. It won't be easy, they'll resist. But if we succeed, it could change everything. Lars took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. Then let's do it, together. The three of them gathered around the crystal once more, their hands hovering close but not quite touching its surface. As Lars focused on the emotions he wanted to convey, hope, compassion, determination, he felt the sisters doing the same, their combined intent amplifying the crystal's power. Colors began to swirl within it again, brighter and more vibrant than before, until the entire room seemed bathed in radiant light. Outside, the first hunter stirred, groaning as he pushed himself up from the snow. His helmeted head snapped toward the cabin, his weapon raised instinctively. Behind him, the others followed suit, their movements sluggish but purposeful. With weapons drawn, they advanced once more, ready to finish what they had started. Inside, Lars closed his eyes and poured every ounce of his willpower into the crystal. Memories flooded his mind, images of humanity at its best. Communities coming together after disasters. Scientists working tirelessly to solve global crises. Artists creating beauty from chaos. He saw laughter, tears, sacrifice, all the messy, imperfect moments that made life worth living. As the hunters burst through the door, weapons aimed directly at them, the crystal erupted in a blinding flash of light. This time, however, the energy didn't push outward, it surged inward, enveloping the hunters in a cocoon of radiance. Their weapons clattered to the ground as they froze, overwhelmed by visions they couldn't comprehend. For several long seconds, nothing moved. Then, one by one, the hunters dropped to their knees, their helmets cracking open to reveal faces twisted in shock and confusion. Tears streamed down their cheeks as they stared at the crystal, their expressions shifting from anger. They understand, Nissa whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. They see it now. One of the hunters, his face pale and gaunt, spoke haltingly, his voice raw and unfiltered. We thought you were threats, abominations, but you're survivors, like us. Leora stepped forward, her gaze steady yet compassionate. And now you know that survival doesn't have to mean destruction. There's another way. The hunters exchanged glances, their earlier hostility replaced by uncertainty, and perhaps even shame. Slowly they rose to their feet, bowing their heads in a gesture of respect before turning and disappearing into the snowy wilderness. When they were gone, Lars sank to the floor, his body trembling with exhaustion. Leora and Nissa joined him, their glowing forms dimming as they too succumbed to fatigue. You did it, Leora murmured, her voice filled with gratitude. You showed them who we really are. No, Lars replied softly, shaking his head. We did it, all of us. In that moment, the sisters realized something profound. Humanity wasn't just resilient because of its ingenuity or adaptability. It was strong because of its capacity to care, to connect, to fight for something greater than itself. And Lars, in turn, understood that these aliens weren't so different from humans after all. Beneath their shimmering skin and glowing eyes beat hearts capable of growth, change, and redemption. The galaxy had changed forever, not through violence or conquest, but through understanding. And as the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, casting golden light across the frozen landscape, Lars knew that this was only the beginning. The sun rose slowly over the Arctic horizon, painting the snow-covered expanse in hues of gold and pink. The storm had passed, leaving behind an almost surreal calm. Inside the battered cabin, Lars sat by the window, gazing out at the world that seemed both unchanged and profoundly different. The sisters Leora and Nissa were nearby, their glowing forms softer now, as if they too were finding peace after the chaos. For a long moment, none of them spoke. There was no need to fill the silence. It carried its own weight, heavy with everything that had transpired. They had faced hunters, fought for survival, and ultimately changed minds not through force, but through empathy and unity. It felt like a dream, yet every bruise, every splintered piece of wood around them was proof that it had been real. Finally, Leora broke the quiet. "What will you do now, Lars Jensen?" she asked, her voice gentle but curious. Lars turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. "I don't know," he admitted. "Go back to studying ice caps, I guess. Pretend none of this ever happened." He smiled faintly, though there was a tinge of sadness in his eyes. "But things can't go back to how they were, can they?" Nisa shook her head, her luminous gaze steady. "No, they can't. Not for us, and not for you." Lars sighed, leaning back against the wall. "You're right, but what about you two? What's next for you?" Leora exchanged a glance with Nisa before answering. "We'll continue our journey to find others who might listen, who might learn from our mistakes. Your world has shown us that hope isn't lost, even when everything seems broken. And maybe we'll find allies along the way," Nissa added softly. "People or beings who believe in cooperation instead of conquest." Lars nodded, feeling a strange mix of pride and sorrow. These two remarkable beings had come into his life so unexpectedly, and now they were preparing to leave just as suddenly. Part of him wanted to beg them to stay, to keep fighting alongside humanity. But another part knew that their mission was bigger than any one person or planet. "You've already made such a difference here," Lars said earnestly. "Not just for me, but for those hunters too." You reminded them of something they'd forgotten. That strength doesn't have to mean cruelty. Leora smiled, her glowing eyes softening. "And you reminded us of something equally important. That courage isn't always loud or flashy. Sometimes it's quiet, persistent, human." Her words lingered in the air, resonating deeply within Lars. He realized then that humanity wasn't defined by its flaws or failures. It was shaped by its ability to rise above them, to care for strangers, to fight for ideals greater than oneself, to choose kindness even in the face of fear. That was what made humans special. And perhaps in some small way, he had helped these alien sisters see that as the morning light grew stronger, casting long shadows across the snow, Leora and Nisa began gathering their belongings. Their shimmering garments caught the sunlight, glowing brighter than ever. Watching them move, Lars felt a pang of loss, but also gratitude. Gratitude for having met them, for being part of something far greater than himself. Before stepping outside, Leora paused and looked back at him. "Will you remember us, Lars?" He chuckled softly, his smile genuine. "How could I forget? You two changed my life forever." Nisa tilted her head slightly, her expression curious. "And what will you tell others about us? About this adventure?" Lars thought for a moment, his gaze drifting toward the horizon where the hunters had disappeared. "I'll tell them the truth," he said finally. "That aliens aren't monsters or gods, they're just people. Different, yes, but not so unlike us. And that sometimes all it takes to bridge the gap between worlds is a little bit of trust and a whole lot of heart." The sisters exchanged a glance, their expressions softening. Then, without another word, they stepped out into the snow, their forms shimmering faintly in the sunlight. Lars watched as they walked away, their figures growing smaller and smaller until they vanished entirely, leaving only footprints behind. For a while, Lars simply stood there, staring at the empty landscape. The Arctic wilderness seemed quieter now, as though holding its breath. Yet somehow, it didn't feel lonely anymore. Instead, it felt alive with possibility, with connection, with hope. As he turned back toward the cabin, Lars noticed something glinting in the snow near the doorway. Bending down, he picked up the crystal, the same object that had sparked this incredible journey. Its glow was faint now, almost imperceptible, but it still pulsed gently in his hand, as though whispering secrets only he could hear. Smiling to himself, Lars tucked the crystal into his pocket. Whatever lay ahead for him, for humanity, for the galaxy, he knew one thing for certain: the universe was vast, unpredictable, and full of wonders. And somewhere out there, two alien sisters were carrying a message of unity, Resilience and compassion to anyone willing to listen. As Lars closed the cabin door behind him and began packing up his gear, he couldn't help but think of the future, not just his own, but the collective destiny of all beings under the stars. Humanity had been underestimated for so long, dismissed as fragile or insignificant. But today it had proven otherwise. Humanity, heck yeah, Lars muttered under his breath, grinning despite himself. And as he trudged through the snow toward the distant hum of his snowmobile, the wind carried his words away, echoing silently across the frozen tundra and beyond.